Hi, it's Katie Moran.
And MJ Coppola.
And Sarah Bob.
We're sharing an 11-part mindful mental health mini-series called RNTKY, sharing 11 reasons not to kill yourself. It started as a blog post, YouTube video, and now a Discord community where we host gratitude challenges. Episodes will be coming out Tuesdays and Thursdays between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day. Today, we're talking about nature and how it never judges. Sometimes we give up on ourselves because we feel others have given up on us. This is never a solution. When we are unjustly judged by others, that does not define us. We are not defined by the way other people treat us, and we are defined by our courage to face ourselves and to rise and keep going. If you are feeling lost from external judgment or even your own inner critic, you can find yourself in nature. I love this idea that nature never judges. Nature accepts us as we are. We need to connect with nature to remind ourselves that we aren't meant to judge. We are only meant to accept. That is our true nature. So you can go outside, find a spot in nature, find yourself in nature. You deserve acceptance. You are worthy of acceptance. And then you can offer acceptance.
This is such a wonderful concept. And I'm so glad to have Sarah on today because I feel like she's got some amazing input on this. As we talk, a friend of mine asked if I could accompany her to her house and one of her houses. And it's in the mountains and it's beautiful and it's perfect because actually I was talking to Katie a couple days or yes, I think it was yesterday, and I forgot my laptop charger. So my laptop is dead. And I meant to do so much work while I was here. And her and my friend both at the same time happened to be in the same vicinity, had said the same thing within 5 minutes. I was like, maybe it's time to put it down, the stuff, maybe the universe or whatever is telling you to stop working for a moment. And I was like, but I don't want to. But now I'm sitting outside and it's morning and it's foggy and it's beautiful. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. Not doing anything in silence is totally fine. It's it feels like I needed to do that. So
Yeah, I love that. And the reason I thought of Sarah is because I know she always has her retreats in the woods and her escapes in the woods. So I'd love to hear, Sarah, what does nature mean to you and how does it positively impact a person's mental health?
Well, thank you for having me here. And I am so glad that you're disconnecting MJ from all the important, busy work that we get stuck in. And you're just connecting with the mother right now. So that's so beautiful. Um, I, so the reason why Katie called me here is because when me and Katie, the first time we ever had a conversation was over Zoom, and I was literally in a place where there was no electricity, no running water. I literally had to walk to the water well to grab the water and go back, and I had my flashlights and everything, and it was just a beautiful experience. It was the very first experience for me of that sort because at the time the few months prior to that, I was kind of done with who I was up to that point, and I wanted kind of a change of myself. And I had the opportunity because COVID was around, work wasn't as busy, and everything was aligning perfectly. So I booked this small, tiny house in the middle of nowhere kind of thing. And it was an experience. I booked it for a week. And it was funny because I asked anybody of my family and friends if they wanted to go, and nobody wanted to go. And I was okay, no problem. So I decided to go. And when they saw what I was gonna do, everybody was betting on me going back the same day or the next day or something like that because they growing up, I was so scared of bugs. I was so scared of the dark. I would not sleep without light on. That's something that I don't talk a lot much about. And there were a lot of times when I crawled out of bed to go sleep next to someone, like either my sibling or my dad or my mom, that's growing up, things like that. And so to them, I was still the same Sarah as that time. And they did not see it as something that I was going to continue that whole week in there. And I kind of was like, no, I want to do the whole week. I'm just looking forward to changing everything who I am. And prior to that, I loved hiking. I loved just going walking by myself. There is something beautiful about hiking in places where it's not that busy. And when I get to the heart of not a lot of people, you don't hear footsteps, you don't hear highway, you don't hear anything. And it just gets like so bright. And if a tiny animal or a big animal like a deer just happened to be passing by, there's that spiritual moment of just looking at each other, acknowledging each other kind of thing, and keep walking in your own way, whatever they're doing, whatever I'm doing, and just, you know, pass, acknowledge each other and keep walking. So when that experience happened in the tiny house, I remember arriving in the evening. It was already getting dark, and I had the flashlight. And when I got in, I remember there wasn't a lock to the house, so it was pretty open kind of thing. Or I thought there was no lock. There was a lock. I didn't see it at night. And when I looked around the room, the tiny room, there was a tiny spider in the corner. And it was one of those spiders with the tiniest body and long legs. And I remember saying like, oh, you're gonna be my roommate. Stay in your corner, I'll stay in mine. And I trust that we're gonna honor each other's spaces. And you know, I was laughing with heartbeat fast kind of thing, because it was, again, bugs growing up. I was scared, all that. So that was a very transformative experience, just being there, listening to the sounds of the night and seeing how the original light for humanity was the moon at night and the stars, and how actually they could be bright, because in cities we don't see these things. I live in cities, I live in populated areas where there is light pollution, which is a real thing. There is a lot of noise, sound pollution, so rarely we have the experience of actual stillness of nature and actual lights of nature, the actual sounds of nature, the company of tiny creatures, the things that form life. You know, we realize there is life everywhere. And whenever, it's interesting because even though I was somewhat isolated from human, I was connected to so many other things that were alive, and you could feel this gentle movement. And every once in a while, a coyote in the distance would make a sound, but still understanding that they don't mean no harm. In that moment of stillness, I could understand the sounds at night were not necessarily, did not to be scary, didn't have to be scary. And it wasn't personal again. You know, that animal did not want to hurt me or anything. They were doing their own thing. I'm doing my own thing. And everything in nature honors each other's spaces. And that was the most beautiful thing. Back to your question, what nature means to me, it just means deeper connection, I guess. It teaches me to actually connect deeper to the moment and other forms of life that we don't necessarily honor day to day.
I love that. And this reason, actually, part of it is for people who feel like they might not have support from others in their life, or they feel like they don't have acceptance, or they're their own worst critic. And like if relationships feel like they bring hurt, chaos, or disappointment, I think this is one out of all of the 11 reasons. This is the one that I think is probably the most supportive for someone who feels like drained from their relationships, which I know a lot of people who are suicidal, sometimes they give more than they receive, and they could have trouble receiving. And with nature, I think it's that kind of energy where you do receive from nature, even sometimes if you aren't used to receiving. I'd love to hear what MJ has to say about this.
Yeah, so it's funny that it's that quote. I mean, the nature doesn't judge. That's such a powerful thing. So I have kind of not really similar experience, but somewhat is when I used to go to a Buddhist temple for a while, they have silent retreats, and those were some of the most important things in my life. They taught me how to listen to my inner self, whether it's like how my body feels or whether it's just like being more comfortable with silence. I feel like that's what nature kind of does for me. Like when I go for a hike, I'll always try to turn my phone off and put it somewhere else, like in my backpack or something. So I'm present with the experience of being like cradled, like Sarah, you're like being with the mother. And that's kind of how it feels to me. Like it feels like being closer to the most authentic like versions of who we're supposed to be. And I think like when we strip away all the other things, we kind of get to experience like what things make us joyful. Like I went on a retreat with somebody. I took them to I found this like cabin in the middle of the woods like a while ago. And I used to do, and I still do, but solo silent retreats where I would go away for a week or something all by myself, like in the middle of the woods. And there was always a host like on site. So, you know, it's this complex, this house where this person lived, and then there were just like cabins all in the woods. And you usually couldn't see your neighbor from the cabin, like, you know, and it got dark, usually go in the winter, so it was dark a decent amount of time. And with those, in some of my most like depressive times, I would actually go. And I am not recommending this, by the way, if you haven't had practice or you don't have somebody to either accommodate you or to, if you don't know, I don't know how to, I would suggest doing it with somebody for a while if you feel like you want to do this type of thing. Because it's real. There was a few times where I was processing something and I was at that place where I had to call somebody to help me remove the sting of the grief at the moment, because it was starting to get to like, I know where my threshold is, where I start to get to that spiral. So it's really important to know that going into something like that. But my experience being there was very healing, because I didn't have to be around other people. Not that other people are bad, but I was in such a place where I didn't understand who I was and who I really wanted to be. Because not only did I not know who I was, but I didn't know, like, I knew I liked writing and creativity, and I, you know, all the things that I do now, but I didn't know how to get there. And I was hurt and in pain and still reeling from abusive situations. And it was nice to, the cabin also didn't have a lock on it. It was a very like way out there type of deal. So, you know, the very like wooden latch, like you just latch it and that's it. Like, so it made me uncomfortable at first. And then after a while of being there, it was just like, okay, I'm closer to nature. Like, you know, whatever. And I remember one time I was there and it was dark and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's no running water in the cabins, by the way. And so you have to go outside to the outhouse to like go to the bathroom. And so I took my little flashlight and I go out, and like halfway there, it's like not that far, right? Halfway there, I hear the coyotes start, and my whole body was like, no, I was freaking out. But when I sat with, like, I went back inside and I like sat with it for a moment. And after the initial, like, you don't realize that like they kind of sound eerie, you know, because you watch, I don't know if anybody else watches horror movies, but sometimes you watch horror movies and it's like the background noise to stuff that's like creepy, right? But it's just part of nature. Like Sarah was saying, it's just part of that. To be at that moment, I realized I was part of something that like I am both isn't there a quote? It's something like, "You're both a drop in the water and the ocean." It was one of those moments where I realized that I had solitary, but I was also part of something big. It was like solidarity and solitary at the same time. And it was beautiful. And there's something about silence. Like once you get past the inner critic that doesn't like silence, because what will you find out? It's actually can be beautiful. And part of it is switching your point of view a little bit, and doing some practice, like just noticing things. You can go on a hike and make a list of really cool things, that you figured out or that you saw, an acorn or a leaf or whatever. It's really freeing. It's been my, like, for lack of a better term, because I do have a real therapist too, but nature to me is like therapy. So
Yeah, I love how you go back to the inner critic. And for me, when I talk about nature accepts, I think sometimes when other people say negative things about us, and we talk about this in the You Matter reason, which was the first episode after the introduction, and just this idea that sometimes we take on those stories people say about us that are negative, and kind of how it's so important not to internalize this external rejection or criticism. And I think that's where the acceptance comes from, because nature isn't going to put those thoughts into your mind, and it like lets you recognize that you're just like accepted without doing anything. And I know you bring up the idea of like abuse, and I think sometimes we can feel, if we've ever been abused in any way, that people kind of use words to manipulate like our behavior to control us, which is really like the foundation underneath abuse is really about control. And just kind of like this idea that nature doesn't try to control, nature doesn't try to manipulate, it just is. And I think that's so freeing. But I'd love to hear Sarah's perspective on nature, and if you want to talk a little bit about like the inner critic, I think that'd be beautiful.
Yeah, I love what you just said. And I love that nature does not try to control, but nature corrects. I think that's the one thing. And that is so beautiful, because there's even nature in, if you follow even climate change and everything that's happening, it tries to keep correcting when it's when it's over pushed. But anyway, back to the thought of inner critic. Being in nature, I realized, and I love MJ, when you were talking, I had a moment of quietness and stillness, and I was just felt like everything like in me just like went like this, and I lived the moment with you, and I loved that, and thank you for that. I had to mention that. But back to the coyotes, realizing that they're doing their own thing. And I love how you mentioned that they're always introduced to us as like that eerie sound in the background of horror movies. And we have all these prejudgment about everything in nature, like spiders will bite you. No, spiders eat other bugs. Coyotes will eat you, for example. Like, no, the coyotes don't just like kill mercilessly. Like, they will eat when they're hungry, and they won't go after rarely they will. I'm not an expert. They will. Don't be alone in nature and in the woods if you're not well trained. I'm not saying that, but I realized that everything, every being, every plant, everything is doing their own thing, regardless of my opinion of them, regardless of what I was told about them, how I was taught to perceive them, and how like my prejudgment. And they're going about their own lives. They're doing what they're meant to, regardless of the other being what they're doing. They don't care that, you know, a squirrel will not look at a stray cat and say like, oh, I can be a house squirrel. And like, you know, that's just an example. Although there are house squirrels, I've seen people having squirrels as pets, but that's a different story. What I'm trying to get at is, it reminds me that we are all put, even human, we're meant to do a human thing. And the most beautiful and complicated thing about human is our ability to think and overthink. And sometimes we cloud our own judgment and what we're supposed to be doing as a human, not supposed to as in like a in a force of, in a way of like to guilt someone into doing something the way they're, how humans supposed to do. Because even now, if you ask all the growth gurus, all the leaders, everybody has a different idea of what a human is supposed to be doing. Because like I said, the most beautiful thing and the most complicated thing is human over like thinking and overthinking. But it just teaches me that, like I said, they're doing their thing, not regardless of my judgment. So why would I not do my own thing regardless of the other judgments? You know, if they're able to, a flower is able to close up at night and then open up in the morning when the sun come out, regardless if I think she's beautiful, the fragrance she puts out is beautiful, regardless if a bee comes in to take the to feed of it and go do what it's supposed to do with the hive, or regardless if a butterfly stops by or a deer just comes and eat it up, like regardless of all these outcomes, she will still close at night and open up in the morning, regardless of what the outcome or what the beings around her are thinking of her as food source, as refuge, as whatever. So those are my thoughts around it.
Yeah, actually, it reminds me of this quote by Lao Tzu, and I think MJ loves this one. Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. So I'd love to just go around, maybe starting with MJ and then Sarah. What are your, if you had one message you'd like to leave everyone with today, what would that final message be?
How do I say this? It doesn't necessarily have to be outside, but it's best to be outside for this. Start if it's at all feasible. Obviously, I highly recommend asking a professional for help in this, but the best practice I ever had was liking the silence, the process of really sitting for as long as I can in the silence, because you won't necessarily get answers within the silence, but they will bubble up, just like when water boils and you have the bubbles that come up. And you can just enjoy the silence. So I think it's a good practice. So it's
Amazing. Sarah?
It doesn't have to be a hike. You could, when you're walking outside, just look at the tree and just acknowledge the tree. Maybe that's one thing we can learn so much from even the grass. I often remind myself that the front lawn of the house I live in is its own ecosystem, and there are so many beings that live in there that think this is the whole world, and I can learn so much from them. And just like looking at them, how they rise in certain seasons, fall down, they don't die, and some die, some don't in certain seasons, and some just sit still when it's hard seasons, when the weather is harsh and the life gets hard for them, and they don't have the resources necessarily. And then when the time is right, they rise again and they take the opportunity to feed and to flourish. So it does not have to be, if you don't have the means, you don't have a car to get anywhere far, you don't have, for some reason, you don't have the means to go for a hike in nature, park, anything, just when you're passing by, start looking and learning from different beings that are still, that are grounded, that are, have roots. And that will get you to the stillness that MJ that's talking about, I guess. Just making, I guess.
I love that. For me, I just want to remind everyone a little bit back to like the series and its purpose in general. So I have a boutique, and one of my favorite shirts and MJ's favorite shirts is one I'm actually wearing today, and it says "meant to be here." And it's just a reminder that even if you feel like you don't fit in, even if you feel like there's not a place for you, suspend that negative thought and know that in the future you might find your place, and that even when things get hard, life is still worth living. And if you ever want to check out or browse the boutique, I actually have a suicide prevention collection, and we donate $2 from every product in that collection to a UK charity, Tiny Changes. And I just think it's so important that we kind of like look at these messages, like one is you are not a burden, there's always hope, and we recognize that we can be the voice for other people when they're feeling hopeless, and that whether it's wearing a t-shirt that is uplifting, or putting a message to someone who's suffering, or just being a helping hand in someone's life and being of service of people who need it. I think it's so important that we recognize that what we do in life makes an impact and it matters, and that we were all meant to be here. So thank you for joining us today, Sarah. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you for
Sarah.
having me. I love you, ladies.
And thanks so much to the listeners. Thank you for watching and listening. Enjoy your day.